Let's create a center of gravity and global control for our horse. We'll start with our center of gravity control. Again, we can keep this simple and right to the point. What we'll do is build an arrow shape that points in the direction the horse is pointed in. We can do that in the side view. Alright, so heading back over to our create panel, this time we'll use our line tool and we'll snap to grid and we'll just draw out a basic arrow shape. Okay, great. We'll close the spline and then exit the tool. And at that point, taking a look at where it is currently, this is not where we want it. So let's go ahead and have it snap to vertebrae A. I'll use quick snap for that. Then we want to make sure that this is easy to select. So what I'll do is head over to the modify panel. We'll go to our vertex subobject. Let's go ahead and turn off grid snap. I'll grab all of our points and let's go ahead and move this up and over in the Z and Y axis. We'll leave the pivot exactly where it's at the pelvis. Okay, great. So that's looking good. At that point, we can go ahead and grab a few of the points in the center and maybe add some more thickness to this. It's not necessary at all. I'll just go ahead and scale this out just to create a wider shape. Alright, great. So just as we've done with the other controls, let's go ahead and recolor this. Add it to our layer. There it is. And then we'll want this renamed. So that's going to be CS COG01. Alright, so at this point, we can go ahead and create our global control. Now I like to work on the global control earlier on because we'll eventually want a majority of our rig linked to that control object. That way we can successfully reposition and reorient the character to match our scene's needs. So let's go ahead and get right to work on that. We'll create a circle. I'll go ahead and enable grid snap and we'll just create it right at the origin of our scene. Just kind of bring this out just a little bit more. Okay, great. And I'll go ahead and turn off grid snap. We want it centered, and it is currently, which is great. And then what we could also do is go ahead and tweak the shape so that the shape itself is centered around the legs a little bit more. So I'll go ahead and grab all of our points, and then we can go ahead and just translate these back. Not necessary, just something I like to do. Given the horse's size and proportions, it kind of feels right to have the shape centered around the legs. But that's just me. Alright, so if we wanted to, we can maybe scale this down just a little bit more. No need to spend too much time on this. The main thing is to make sure that the pivot is right in the center of our scene, right in the center of our character. Alright, so at this point we can go ahead and rename this to CS Global 01. Let's have that stored in its layer. Okay, great. Let's also recolor it. And now at this point, we're ready to start linking all of our controls together. So I like to work on the linking step first before we go in and of course start to, let's say, reset the X-form on these controls and later freeze them. This is so that we can avoid skewing as they transform. So to get right to work, we'll want to grab our thorax, mid-vertebrae, and pelvis controls, and we'll want them linked to the center of gravity. The center of gravity will get linked to the global control. Alright, so once we have finished linking, We can now go in and grab all of these objects, including the global control. We can head over to our Utilities tab, reset the X-form on these objects, and then we can go ahead and collapse them using the first choice modifier stack result. That way they still keep their history. They won't change their shape at all. Alright, so once these have been collapsed and the X-form removed, we can now go ahead and freeze these objects. So again, selecting all of our controls, Alt right click, choose Freeze Transform. Alright, so now as we start to animate, if we start to have the hips kind of dance around and say, oh, I need to get back to my skin pose, well, it's just a matter of Alt right clicking and choosing Transform to 0. So let's go ahead and check that for every single control. We don't want any surprises. Transform to 0. We'll check the thorax. Great. All right, well, our vertebrae controls are finished. So guess what? Now it's time to start connecting our vertebrae rig to these animation controls, and we'll begin that in the next lesson.